All right, so get ready because we are diving deep into today's U.S. news. And wow, we've got a lot to cover today. From some pretty intense winter storms to, Elon Musk doing his thing.
Well, I guess you could say that.
Yeah, I think that's putting it lightly.
Yeah.
But seriously, you guys have sent us a ton of news excerpts, and it's a lot to unpack, but I'm excited to dig in.
Always fascinating to see how all these seemingly random events, actually connect to the bigger picture.
Right, exactly. It's all connected.
And today's news is a perfect example of that.
So let's jump right in. Let's start with these crazy winter storms that are hitting, well, I guess most of the U.S., but especially the news from Kentucky is just devastating.
Absolutely.
11 fatalities already, and they're saying the storms aren't even over yet.
Yeah, that's right.
And, Tennessee and Virginia are getting hit hard, too.
Yeah, this whole polar vortex thing, it's no joke.
What exactly is a polar vortex?
Well, imagine like a massive swirling pool of freezing cold air.
Okay, yeah.
Just hanging out, around the North Pole, and every now and then a chunk of it breaks off and dips down south.
Bringing that frigid air with it.
Exactly. And that's what's causing these extreme temperatures. And some places, like Texas, they're just not equipped to handle this kind of extreme cold.
That's right. Which reminds me, remember that massive power grid failure in Texas back in 2021?
Yeah, how can we forget that?
Millions of people without power. It was a disaster.
It was.
Do you think they've, learned their lesson? Are they ready for another freeze like this?
Well, they've definitely taken some steps, to try to improve their grid. But this storm, it's a real test. And it raises a bigger question, too, about climate change and these crazy weather events that seem to be happening more and more.
So are we doing enough to, prepare for this kind of thing to make sure our, infrastructure can handle it?
That's what we need to be asking ourselves, right?
It is a little bit scary, yeah.
It is.
Okay, well, speaking of things that make people nervous, how about we talk about Elon Musk for a minute?
Oh, boy. Yeah. Seems like he's everywhere these days.
I know, right? You can't escape him. But there was this one story, I just had to shake my head when I read it. Apparently, he tried to get his hands on taxpayer data through Neuralink.
Neuralink, that's his brain-computer interface company, right?
Yeah, that's the one. But thankfully, the judge blocked it.
Oh, good.
But seriously, what was he thinking?
Right. It does seem like a major overreach.
It really does.
And it kind of makes you think about, data privacy and, well, the whole balance of power between the government and these big corporations.
That's a really good point, actually. I hadn't thought of it that way. Imagine if he had gotten access, to all that sensitive information.
Exactly. It could have set a very dangerous precedent.
So it's not just about Elon Musk. It's about the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Okay, well, sticking with the whole Elon Musk theme, there's this other story, and it's kind of a weird one. Apparently, he sent a team from SpaceX to help the FAA, with their safety systems.
Interesting. On the surface, that sounds like a positive thing.
Right, like who's against better safety?
Yeah, exactly.
But there's a but.
Yeah. Well, you have to remember that the FAA had a lot of budget cuts during the Trump administration. A lot of downsizing.
Oh, right. I remember hearing about that.
It impacted a lot of their safety programs, even their, expertise.
I see where you're going with this.
So it makes you wonder, is Musk really doing this out of the goodness of his heart? Or is there something else going on?
You think he's trying to gain more influence over the FAA?
It's possible, right? Think about it. The FAA is the one who sets all the regulations for everything SpaceX does. So maybe this is his way of, getting a foot in the door.
That is pretty strategic.
And a little bit concerning if you think about it, because it all comes down to transparency, right? What are their real intentions here?
Right. Okay, well, this actually reminds me of another story about Musk, the one where he was criticizing, diversity and inclusion programs.
You mean the DBI programs?
Yeah, those. But then, at the same time, it seems like he's benefiting from, preferential treatment in his own business dealings.
I see what you mean. The irony.
Yeah, a little bit, right.
It's definitely not lost on a lot of people. And it's fueling that whole anti-Elon Musk sentiment that we see growing online.
I get it. It's hard to ignore that kind of contradiction.
Right. On one hand, he's criticizing these programs that are trying to level the playing field, but then he seems to be benefiting from the very systems he's criticizing.
So is that the main reason people are turning against him? Because of, his hypocrisy?
I think it's part of it, yeah. It's like this disconnect between his words and his actions, and it makes people question his motives, his overall impact on society.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, I think we've officially unpacked enough Elon Musk for one day.
I think that's wise.
Let's take a look at what's happening on the global stage, because things are, let's just say they're heating up over there, too, especially when it comes to the U.S. and its role in the war in Ukraine.
Definitely a complex situation.
Definitely.
It is. And this whole thing with the U.S. trying to set up peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, I mean, it's interesting.
It is, but they want to hold them in Saudi Arabia, and they're not even inviting Ukraine or their European allies to the first round of discussions.
Yeah, that's causing some friction, to say the least.
It seems like a lot of people are upset about this.
A lot of the European leaders are seeing this as a sign that, well, that the U.S. is basically sidelining them, you know?
Like they don't really care what Europe thinks.
And that they might even make concessions to Russia without even considering Ukraine's interests or even, Europe's security concerns.
Right, because whatever happens over there, it impacts Europe much more directly than the U.S. Yeah, the articles you sent definitely reflect that skepticism. A lot of people are wondering, are these talks even serious? Or is this just the U.S. trying to, appease Russia so they can focus on other things?
But it's a valid question. And it ties into this idea of, global power dynamics shifting.
Right, because the U.S. is dealing with a lot right now. China's on the rise. There's all this political division at home.
Exactly. So maybe this move in the Middle East, well, maybe it's a sign that they're trying to, reevaluate their priorities, figure out what they can handle.
So maybe they're stepping back from global leadership.
Maybe. Or maybe it's a calculated strategy, to focus on something else.
Speaking of China, there's this other story that caught my eye. It's about the U.S. removing that phrase, we do not support Taiwan independence.
Oh, right, from that official document.
Yeah, and China is not happy about it at all. Should we be worried?
It's definitely a big deal. I mean, China sees Taiwan as part of their territory, and anything that even hints at supporting Taiwan's independence, well, that's a major red line for them.
So this move, even if it's symbolic, it could really escalate things.
It could. The U.S.-China relationship is already pretty fragile. This definitely doesn't help.
I wonder how people in Taiwan feel about all this.
Well, that's where it gets complicated. The articles mention that there are mixed reactions in Taiwan. Some people see it as a good thing, like the U.S. is showing support.
Standing up for them.
Right. But then others are worried that it'll provoke China, put Taiwan in a dangerous position.
So it's a tough spot for them to be in.
It is, yeah. No easy answers there.
Okay, well, let's take a break from global politics for a minute. I want to talk about something a little closer to home. Remember that story about the L.A. mayor? The one who went to that ceremony in Ghana during that huge wildfire we had here?
Oh, yeah. He admitted it was a mistake.
Yeah. Do you think this is like a sign of the times? Are people expecting more from their leaders these days?
I think so, yeah. There's definitely a growing trend of, holding people in power accountable. The public just isn't as tolerant as they used to be, when it comes to stuff like this.
Especially when it involves public safety and, people's well-being.
Exactly. They want their leaders to be present, to be making the right calls, to be prioritizing the right things.
It's interesting, though. It's like there's a different standard for some people, like Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
It seems like he gets away with a lot more, even though he makes some pretty questionable decisions.
That's a good point. It's like, are there different levels of accountability based on, I don't know, your wealth, your influence?
I don't know. It's a tough question, and I don't think there's an easy answer.
Definitely not.
Speaking of tough questions, there is this other story that really hit me hard. It was about that South Korean actor Kim Sai-ram who took his own life.
Oh, that's right. Tragic story.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to see how it sparked conversations about mental health, not just in South Korea, but here in the U.S., too.
It shows how connected we all are. Really?
It does, yeah.
Like, even though most people in L.A. probably never saw his movies, they still connected with his story. The pressures of fame, the whole online culture thing, the mental health crisis, it's all connected.
It's a good reminder that, behind all the fame and success, these are still real people dealing with real struggles.
Absolutely. We all need to be more mindful of that.
And speaking of creating a more supportive environment, did you hear about the LA school district? They're banning cell phones in schools.
Starting tomorrow, yeah.
What do you think about that? Good idea, bad idea?
It's a tough one. I can see both sides.
Me too.
On one hand, there's all this concern about kids spending too much time on their phones, on social media, and that's not good for their mental health, their development.
Right, and it can be distracting in school, too.
Exactly. So maybe this is a way to, create a more focused learning environment, get kids to interact with each other more.
But don't you think phones can also be, valuable tools for learning?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the other side of the argument, right? Some people say that banning phones completely is just, well, it's going too far.
Yeah, and that it's better to teach kids how to use them responsibly, instead of just taking them away.
Right, like digital literacy and all that.
Exactly.
It's a tough balance. This whole thing really shows how much we're still figuring out technology's role in education.
It does. It makes me wonder, is this part of a bigger trend? Are we starting to push back against technology in general? I mean, we've got the whole anti-Elon Musk thing going on. People are worried about AI taking over.
And there's that whole movement for a 4-day work week.
Right, exactly. Do you think these are all connected?
I think they might be. I mean, there's definitely a growing awareness of the downsides of technology, even though we all use it, constantly.
Feels like we're starting to realize maybe it's not all good.
Right. And I think people are starting to ask, what kind of future do we want? What role do we want technology to play?
I mean, the 4-day work week thing is interesting. It seems like a lot of people are banking on AI, automating a lot of our jobs.
And they'll free us up to, pursue other things, spend more time with family, hobbies, whatever.
But is that realistic? And even if it is that the kind of future we actually want?
It's a big question. I mean, on the surface, it sounds great, right? More free time, less stress.
Yes, I'm yet.
But there are some serious concerns, too, like what happens to all the people whose jobs are automated? And how do we make sure everyone benefits? Not just a select few.
So it's not just about whether we can do it, it's about what kind of society we create in the process.
Exactly. And that's something we all need to be thinking about. The choices we make now are going to shape the future.
Wow, this deep dive has taken us to some interesting places.
It has, hasn't it?
We've covered a lot of ground, from winter storms to global politics to the future of work. It's a lot to process.
It is, yeah. But that's what makes it so fascinating, right? The world is a complex place, and the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know.
That's a good point. It's easy to get overwhelmed, but I think it's important to stay curious, to keep asking questions, and to try to understand the bigger picture.
Absolutely. That's the only way we're going to navigate this crazy world.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this wild ride.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We'll be back soon to dive into even more fascinating topics. But until then, stay curious and keep exploring. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into all things U.S. news. And I gotta say, there's a lot swirling around in my brain right now, from those winter storms to the whole Elon Musk situation and global tensions. It's a lot.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like a fire hose of information sometimes. But I think if we take a step back, there are some key takeaways we can focus on, some threads that connect all these seemingly random events.
Okay, I'm all ears. What have you noticed?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me is this underlying feeling of, well, I guess you could call it unease, uncertainty about the future.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. It's like everything's changing so fast and it's hard to keep up,
Exactly. Like we're standing on shifting ground, whether it's those crazy weather events becoming more frequent or AI advancing at warp speed or even those global power dynamics constantly in flux. It's a lot for anyone to process.
It makes you feel kind of powerless almost. Like, what can we even do about any of this?
Right. And I think that feeling of powerlessness, that's what's fueling a lot of the anxiety and division we see in society. People are grasping for answers, looking for someone to blame, someone to tell them it's all going to be okay.
Makes you think about those conversations we had earlier about leadership and accountability. Like, remember that story about the LA mayor going to Ghana during that wildfire?
Yeah. Seems like a small thing, but it really struck a nerve with people.
Right. It's like people aren't holding their leaders to a higher standard now. They want transparency, they want competence, and they want someone who's going to put their well-being first.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because we see this demand for accountability playing out differently depending on who you are. Like with Elon Musk, for example.
Yeah, it's like he gets a pass on a lot of stuff, even when he makes decisions that seem, well, questionable at best.
Right. So it makes you wonder, is it really about holding powerful people accountable? Or is it more about who those people are?
That's a tough question. What about that anti-Elon Musk movement that's gaining traction? Do you think it's just about him personally, or is it something bigger?
Honestly, I think it's a bit of both. He's become this symbol, both positive and negative. For some people, he represents innovation, progress, this whole idea of pushing boundaries and disrupting the status quo. But for others, he embodies the risks that come with unchecked power and influence.
It seems like he's this lightning rod for all these anxieties people have about technology. On one hand, it's exciting to think about AI solving all our problems and creating a world where we don't have to work as much.
Right, more free time, more leisure, that's appealing to a lot of people.
But on the other hand, there's the fear of the unknown. What happens when AI becomes too smart? What happens to all the jobs that get automated? Who benefits from all this progress and who gets left behind?
Exactly. It's not a simple equation. And I think it's important to have these conversations, to really think critically about the role we want technology to play in our lives. Because if we're not careful, it could end up shaping us rather than the other way around.
So what can we do? I mean, as individuals facing all these massive global challenges, it's easy to feel helpless.
I get that. It's overwhelming. But I think the most important thing is to not give in to that feeling of helplessness, to stay informed, to be critical thinkers, and to engage in these conversations. Because the future isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices we make, both individually and collectively.
So it's about finding that balance, right, between acknowledging the challenges and also recognizing our own agency, our own power to shape the future.
Exactly. And remembering that even small actions can make a difference.
That actually reminds me of the story about Kim Se-rum, the actor who took his own life. It was a tragedy, but it also sparked important conversations about mental health and the need for more compassion and support in the world.
Such a good point, because it highlights the importance of connecting with each other, of recognizing our shared humanity, even amidst all the chaos and uncertainty.
It's easy to get lost in the headlines and the political debates, but at the end of the day, we're all in this together. And we have a responsibility to look out for each other, to support each other, and to create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been quite a journey, wouldn't you say? From winter storms to global politics to the future of technology, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But I always enjoy these deep dives. It's a reminder that the world is full of complexities and there's always more to learn.
I agree. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration. We hope you found it thought-provoking and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Remember, the future is not predetermined. It's something we create together. So stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking questions. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the most fascinating topics of the day.